I'm going to host today's talk, which will actually be 3 short talks on curricular innovations, modes of delivery, and student behavior. All of the speakers are from our digital learning lab. And Molly suggested, and I think this is a great idea, for me to start by not introducing the speakers, but introducing the digital learning lab. So what is the digital learning lab? Well, the digital learning lab is, it's not a place, it's a group of people, 25 to 30 people, each of whom is situated in a department. So I see Mary Ellen, she's in the biology department. I see, who else do I see? I see Anna, who's in computer science. I see Michelle, who's in physics. I can't see John Liu at the moment. John's in mechanical engineering, et cetera. Each of them is a key member of their department. Molly, are you admitting people as they come? I see that that's popping up for me. Should I be doing that, or are you doing it?
We're taking care of it. Don't worry.
Okay, thanks. I see people arriving in the waiting room. Each of them is a key member of their department, who was originally at some point in the past hired by their department, mentored in their department, works in their department. And what do? They help faculty, instructors in multiple courses, typically one after another, build digital learning content. Could be to develop a MOOC, an online course for the world that runs on the edX platform. And many of our most successful MOOCs were key roles in building them were played by the members of the Digital Learning Lab. Could be that they're helping in the on-campus teaching of a course in their department, helping to bring in digital learning content, digital learning tools, and to blend them into the pedagogy of that course on campus. Very often it's both. There's this, when we talk in the abstract about digital learning at MIT, we talk about this synergy, this interplay back and forth between the things that we build that are world-facing and the things that we do that are for MIT students, and how they're often one and the same thing. It's the Digital Learning Lab that makes this actually happen. Everything I just said, I could have said before March. What none of us knew is that at the same time, the Digital Learning Lab, it wasn't planned this way, but they were being built to give MIT pandemic resilience. This was not planned, but that's the way it turned out. Since March, each of them has played extraordinary roles in helping the faculty and instructors and teachers in their department learn how to do things that they've never done before. Because each of the Digital Learning Lab fellows and scientists has built up a considerable expertise in how teaching and learning actually work, how learning online works best. And that has been incredibly valuable for their departments and hence for MIT as a whole. So our role in the Office of Digital Learning is to play a sort of a convening role. In normal times, this group of people, as I said, they sit in their departments. They meet in the conference room across from my office twice a month. Nowadays, of course, that's a Zoom room. So we play a convening role so that we create a fabric where the people that I'm describing in all their different departments all know each other and form a community, Digital Learning Lab community, in addition to each belonging to their departmental community. Along the way, many of our Digital Learning Lab are motivated to ask research questions about how people learn, how MOOCs can best be built, how digital learning can best be deployed in a blended learning context. Many, but certainly not all, many have written papers published in education journals, have gone to conferences, given talks at conferences. And what we're doing in today's X Talk is giving 3 groups of Digital Learning Lab fellows and scientists the opportunity to present to you give you presentations based on their research. Each of them can tell you which conference it was presented at, or where it has been or may in future be published, or whether where it is in their research pipelines. But each of these are cool new results coming out of the research of folks in the Digital Learning Lab. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first. Who's going first? Can you remind me who's going first, Molly?
Jessica.
I am Christian.
Sandlin.
It's Jessica. So Jessica Sandlin, Digital Learning Lab scientist. She's been in the business of digital learning about much longer than I have. She's one of the pillars of our effort at MIT. In addition to her work along the lines that I've described for the material science department, she's also been the key person in conceiving and piloting our first XMiner, which is not the subject of today's presentation. Today, she'll be telling us about the use of comics in an online course, in an online teaching. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Krishna. And thank you all for being here today. I think it's...
Oh, I'm sorry. Jessica, before I hand off to you, let me just say how we're going to do Q&A. I should have said this. Anyone who has sort of questions during each presentation, please ask them in the chat. And when we get to the end of each presentation, if there are sort of sharp and apropos and immediate questions in the chat, I will call upon them, and whoever wrote in the chat can unmute and ask their question. More open-ended, broader questions we're going to leave till the end, and we'll have a more open-ended and broader conversation with all three presenters, including among each other, at the end after all three presentations. So please put questions in the chat, and if they're sort of direct and I didn't understand what you meant on slide 3 kinds of questions, I will call on them after each talk, but then we'll have a broader conversation after all three. So Jessica, now the floor really is yours, and I'll be watching the chat.
First of all, can you all see my slides? Good, excellent. No, thank you all for being here today. It's really exciting to see so many faces and so many people, and so many of you that I no longer have the opportunity to see on a very regular basis over in Open Learning. And as Krista said, I'm going to be talking to you today about our comic book based MOOC of electronic, optical, and magnetic properties of materials. And I'm here representing really a larger group from the Department of Materials Science and Engineering who developed this course. And my first objective here is I just want to tell you a little bit about electronic, optic, and magnetic properties of materials. I think in the Materials Science and Engineering department, we have a little bit of a competition going to see how long we can possibly make our course names. They're always very, very long. And this course is a course that's taken, historically has been taken by our sophomores. And if you want to get a degree in material science and engineering from our department, you have to go through this course. I think we're going to be giving it to our juniors from here on out. But it is a course that really covers lots and lots of material, starting with some topics in quantum mechanics, moving on to some topics in solid state physics. We talk about device physics and device engineering. And the aim really is to help these material scientists really understand, the materials and the science and the engineering of things like their telephone or of fiber optics, or, all of these technologies that really underpin our modern society more and more and more these days. And it's, I think, generally a very exciting class for our undergraduates. I think it's often a very intimidating class for our undergraduates. And the course is led by Professor Polina Anakieva, and she's the professor who leads the MIT course, but also is sort of our head, the person who is leading the 3024X project as well. And, you know, I think in part because this course can be a little bit intimidating for our sophomore students, one thing Professor Anakieva does is she incorporates these comic themes and these superhero themes into her course. So perhaps when you're taking your final examination, you might find that the Hulk appears on your final exam somehow. Or if you're, you know, doing a problem set, you might find that there's a superhero flying in. And probably the most exciting bit of this for, I think, many of us is something that's called the 3024X comic battle. And the 3024X comic battle is something that Professor Anakieva does in lieu of a review session every year. And what happens is all of the students get together. They don't know that this is going to happen. Some of them may hear from the grapevine, but it is a surprise. And on the last day of class, instead of a review, they're all divided into groups and they are asked to develop superhero comics that incorporate ideas and themes and real science and real engineering into these comics. So they're not just allowed to have, you know, superheroes flying by who obey kind of random laws of physics. They have to obey the laws of physics that they have been taught in the 3024 course. And when we started developing this course, one thing that was important to Professor Anakieva was to try to maintain these sort of comic book themes that are so prevalent in her in-person course. However, for us, it didn't really make a lot of sense, I think, to try to reproduce the comic book battle in an online fashion. That didn't seem like it was going to meet with very much success. So instead, we decided, well, if we are unable to, you know, if we're unable to have the students make comic books for us, we were going to bring the comic books to them. And the course team, and really, I think this initiative was led primarily by someone who was at the time an undergraduate student. Her name's Emma Vargo. I think she's a graduate student at Stanford now. And Emma led an effort to develop a whole series of comic strips, develop characters, develop plots, incorporate science, and incorporate engineering into these comics. And she developed these 3024X comic strips in conjunction with Professor Anakieva and some of the other members of the course team. And these weren't just kind of like standalone, you know, we put a comic out there and we leave you to it kind of things. They were really incorporated into the homework sets in a very integrated way. So I'll give you an example of a homework problem that if you were to go sign up for 3024X right now, and I highly encourage you to, if you would like to learn more, that you'd be asked to solve. So our heroes here have decided to make lights for the controls of their ship's cockpit. They plan to make light-emitting devices with emissions wavelengths from blue to green. They've already used up in a previous comic strip their silicon-like meteoroid. They made a solar cell out of it, but luckily Ferro, who is one of our heroes, has quite a collection of meteoroids. He selects a different meteoroid, and this one's composed of gallium nitride. And what we asked the students to do is we asked them to design, we asked them to engineer a gallium nitride light-emitting diode that is going to meet these specific needs of our character here. So, you know, the comics, these themes, they're very well, or very thoroughly at least, integrated into this homework. And this idea, you know, of using comics, of using humor in the classroom, this is not new. People have been certainly doing this in different ways for a long time. And people have been studying this. Educational researchers have been studying this for a long time. I think for our perspective, we hope that the integration of these comics would help to improve student performance and really help to improve student motivation in the course. And there's certainly promising research out there that suggests that this could be the case. You know, research showing that student attitudes and enjoyment increase when humor is used in the classroom. People have shown increases in measures of creativity when humor is used in the classroom. And there've even been studies, some in, you know, university level engineering classrooms that have actually shown an increase in student performance with the course material when humor is used in the classroom. But this story is not a clear one. You know, there are situations where student performance or student attitudes increase. There are situations where you see the opposite effect or no effect. So it's hard to know exactly what, you know, what is going to happen when you start to use humorous elements in your class. And, you know, we wanted to know what was going to happen in our class. And so we conducted an A/B test on the edX platform. edX has made it a fairly straightforward thing for us to do. So our students were divided into 2 different groups randomly assigned when they enrolled in the class. And we did a short test just with one homework assignment. Half the students received the homeworks that incorporated the superhero themes, and half the students received the same problems, but, you know, instead of designing an LED to help out Pharaoh, you were just designing an LED with, you know, specific parameters. And we looked at some different things. We looked at how many students actually completed the problem set, so sort of dropout rates in the classes, average score, and some student attitudes. And I will say, I guess the good news is we didn't do any harm incorporating these comics. Maybe the less encouraging thing is it didn't help our student performance either, at least with our edX students. We see a very similar number of students making it through to the end of the first problem set. And there's no statistically significant difference between the average score that the students got on their problem sets. So as far as, you know, their ability to maintain students or improve their performance, we saw no effect. But the other question we had was, well, what does this mean for student attitudes? Are the students enjoying this more? And we asked both our edX learners, and then this time we also asked our MIT students what they thought of. Did they enjoy the comics that were embedded in the homework assignments? And in both cases, we saw that, yes, they reported enjoying these comics, and the MIT students, you know, somewhat more than our edX learners. And then we wanted to know something a little bit different, which was, do you prefer your homework assignments to have these comics, or do you prefer your homework assignments without these comics? And here I think we saw something that was really interesting. With our edX learners, the plurality of students said they would have preferred we just leave the comics out. And a vast majority of students either said they preferred the homework assignments without the comic strips or had no preference as to whether or not we incorporated them. But when we looked at the MIT students, this graph is kind of flipped on its head. None of the students wanted us to offer homework assignments without the comics. And really a large majority preferred the comic strips with the comics. And for me, as someone who works a lot in a MOOC environment, I think this proved a very interesting result. And what it says to me and what it sort of cautions me is that, you know, results and feedback that we get about our courses with our edX learners, this is not always going to be a directly applicable thing when it comes to our MIT students. And I will point out that there are very large differences, demographic differences, general differences between our edX learners and our MIT students. Our edX learners are in general older. I think the average age in this class was 27. They are predominantly male, whereas on campus 3024 is about 50-50 male and female. The English language skills between the two groups where, you know, our MIT students are all fluent language English speakers. That's not true of our edX learners. And our edX learners are actually more educated than our MIT students. I think, at least in 3024X, more than half of them had bachelor's degrees coming into the course. So I think to me, this provides a, you know, an interesting case example that we can't necessarily assume what works for one group of learners will work for another group of learners. And, you know, as I think about the, you know, some of the other results we show, it makes me wonder what would happen if we, you know, if we had the opportunity to analyze the learning of our MITx students, or rather our on campus, our MIT students. So that's really what I have to talk to you about today. I just really want to, before I go, any of you who have made MOOCs, who have been involved in making MOOCs, you know that this is an enormous team effort. I just wanted to call out the 3024X team, Professor Anna Kieva, our fearless leader, and Emma Vargo, our comic designer, and also Jane Holland, who took Emma's kind of sketches and designs and turned them into professional looking comics for us. There was a whole course development team, a course support team. There is, of course, the MITx team over at Open Learning. So I just wanted to, sort of call them all out. And I think in general, MOOCs take, lots of people and lots of work. And this one, perhaps even more so, was really a team effort. So thank you all very much for listening to me today, and I'll send it back over to Krishna.
Thank you, Jessica. Just one, I don't see questions in the chat, so I'll just ask, can you, just one word about which conference you presented this at?
Learning with MOOCs.
And?
Oh, and we won the best paper at Learning with
There
MOOCs.
we go. There we go. Second round of applause, please, for Jessica and her colleagues. I'll just say, I'm just watching the chat. I'll just say this class on campus 3024 is a remarkable class, and I'm speaking as a physics professor. Oh, someone just direct messaged me and said that people aren't able to send chat to the whole group. Could someone just, I'm not sure why that's so. I think this is an ordinary meeting, isn't it?
Hi, Krishna, it's Nina over at edX. And it seems as if we can only message directly to co-hosts, not to a global chat. So maybe people have been sending Jessica specifically chats. I'm not sure.
I do have a question on my chat. I would have thought to look.
Molly, can you make me a co-host then, please? And
I made you a co-host,
Nina, did you have a question?
I've changed the chat so that there's a little bit more flexibility and people can
Yeah,
send.
okay, good. Molly just fixed it. Thank you.
I didn't, Krishna. I was just chiming in on the chat issue.
Okay, and Jessica, did you get a question direct message to you?
I did have one. I have a question from Paul Mende, who asks, did you cover less material or in less depth? No, not really. The goal of certainly our MOOCs in material science and engineering, and I think in general across the Institute, is to really try to cover the material in the same depth as we do on campus. Now, I will say there are components of the class that we had to leave out. There is a laboratory component to the class that we did not include. Professor Anna Kieva has a large focus on design reviews that the students do in groups together. And those were not really sort of practical exercises for our MOOC environment. But as far as the topics that are covered and the students do the same problem sets in the MOOC environment that they do here on campus. So we can't include everything, but what we can include, we try to include to the same depth.
So
Jessica,
Stephanie just, oh, thank you, Paul, go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up. I really, the question was, is there a cost to including humor?
Oh.
Not just compared to the traditional course MOOC, but MOOC with humor. I mean, there's a lot of work that went into this. Do you have to give anything up?
I don't think so. So a lot of this was actually incorporated into sort of pre-existing material. So Polina and her TAs had problems and problem sets that they used every year and whatnot, and so it was a lot of additional work, outside to get that incorporated into the material. But it was really sort of an evolution of material that already existed, I think.
So I'm going to ask you to unshare and the next group to start sharing. But while that's happening, I'll just say that 3024 on campus is, speaking as a professor of physics, it's a remarkable course. It basically, it's impossible what it does. In one semester, it takes a slice through electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, and statistical mechanics, sort of material that in the physics standard MIT physics curriculum would be about 5 semesters. And it slices through it in a way which is without compromise in terms of sort of, rigor or difficulty, but it slices through it with purpose because it's motivated by the material science goals. That should be the kind of class that gets lousy ratings because the students feel crushed by it. Instead, when you look it up, it gets 6.3s and 6.4s all the time. And once the most recent time Paulina taught it, it got a 6.9, which is kind of remarkable given that that's an average score from 20 students. So somehow or other, Paulina Anikeva on campus is able to do something remarkable. And it may be that Jessica has found part of Paulina's secret sauce. I'll also say the MOOC, not surprisingly, given what I said about the on-campus course, that the MOOC is something that we're very proud of too. So our next presenters are, the people presenting are, is Moni going to be the sole presenter?
Yes.
So there's Moni Aveo and Mary Ellen Wiltrout, from biology, and Annabelle and Christine von der Haar from computer science, and Shira Fruchtman from open learning. Their research is about impact of course delivery mode on learner engagement in MOOCs. And Moni, please take it away.
Thanks, Krishna. I just want confirmation that everyone can see my slides. Thank you. All right, so thanks for the introduction, Krishna. You've basically delivered my first slide, so I'm just going to get right into it. So hi, everyone. My name is Monica Arroyo, or Moni, and I'll be presenting our collective work today on course delivery modes. Okay. So in general, there are 2 types of course delivery modes that are available for MOOCs. One of them is instructor-paced, which I'm going to abbreviate in my slides as IT. And these are your traditional school semester-like course, where content is released gradually over time as the course is available, that there are multiple deadlines associated with the assessments that are released throughout the course over time. And in general, the course is open for a short duration of roughly 50 to 60 days, 2 months. In contrast, the other flavor of course delivery mode is self-paced mode, which I'm going to abbreviate SP in my slides. And in self-paced mode, content is released all at once, just at the very beginning of the course. And there's a single deadline associated with all the assessments of that course at the very, very end. And the duration of a self-paced run is typically much longer than that of an instructor-paced. In the instances we're talking about, 360 days or roughly a year. Now, one of the choices that we, as in the MOOC designers and facilitators, have to make is which of these 2 course delivery modes do we offer our MOOCs in? And it's been assumed, sort of, in our line of work that self-paced is preferable over instructor-paced on the assumption that having a longer, more flexible schedule allows learners to better engage with and complete the courses. So we were curious and wanted to pose the research question, well, does running a MOOC in self-paced versus instructor-paced mode increase learner engagement? And so there are previous studies that have compared these 2 course delivery modes. However, they've provided mixed results. Analyses are often conducted on a small sample, 2 runs of the same MOOC, one self-paced, one instructor-paced, or on an aggregation of incredibly different MOOCs that were either instructor-paced or self-paced. And in terms of the metrics measured, more often than not, focused on learner completion rate. Did they complete the MOOC and pass? And so we were interested in diving into this question in a slightly different way. And we decided to focus our work on looking at learner engagement for the same MOOC offered in both delivery modes. And so how we chose to do this was by analyzing 2 computational MOOCs that everyone involved in this project have designed and then facilitated the running of, that have been offered in both self-paced and instructor-paced modes with little change to course content. And so one of these MOOCs is an advanced quantitative biology MOOC with a modest average of 3,000 registered learners per run. And we compared 5 instructor-paced runs to 2 self-paced runs that were offered between 2014 and 2019. The second MOOC we looked at was an introductory computational programming MOOC. This one has a whopping 85,000 registered learners on average per run. And of these, we looked at 8 instructor-paced runs and compared that to 1 self-paced run that were offered at similar times to the quantitative biology runs. Now, summarizing some figures, what I'd like to quickly tell you is that running a MOOC in self-paced versus instructor-paced mode, we found did not increase engagement metrics for all learners. And I promised you we looked at more than just one simple blind engagement metric. We mean this by general edX engagement metrics, such as participating, which is clicking into the course just once, exploring, which is if a learner clicks through half of the course content available, completing, which is completing all the graded assessments in a course with a passing score. And last but not least, verifying, which is purchasing a certificate. We also found that running a MOOC in self-paced mode versus instructor-paced mode didn't increase specific activity metrics we were interested, such as posting to the discussion forum, attempting a problem, or watching a video. Now, we decided we wanted to delve a little further, and we also asked, in addition to engagement metrics, does running a MOOC in self-paced versus instructor-paced mode increase the activity of learners who complete the MOOC? These are our most dedicated learners. They went through all the assessments and they passed. And we decided to define the act of submitting a problem, this is something we can measure, as our metric for being active in the course. And specifically, we asked whether learners who completed the MOOCs were submitting a problem in a greater range of days or submitting a problem in a greater total number of days. I'm going to define those metrics precisely for you, and I'm going to show you some data. So first, range of days. We define this as the number of days between the last and the first date that a learner who completed the MOOC submitted a problem while the course was active. And so here I've drawn for you a hypothetical timeline with the ticks representing days. If a learner who completed the MOOC submitted problems on the days indicated by arrows, then the range of days is simply the difference between this last date that the learner submitted a problem and the first date they ever submitted a problem. Now, data. So here's a box plot depicting what I just described for you, the range of days for all learners who completed the MOOC on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, the different runs of the quantitative biology MOOC labeled by the year it was offered. And I've color-coded these for you where the instructor-paced runs are in blue and the self-paced runs are in red. And what we found was that running a MOOC in self-paced mode did result in learners who completed the MOOC submitting problems in a greater range of days in the quantitative biology MOOC, as well as our computational programming MOOC. Boom. Now, however, we look at the next metric. So the second metric I've promised you is the total number of days, which we defined as the number of unique days a learner who completed the MOOC submitted a problem while the run was active. So again, if we take our hypothetical timeline where ticks are days and these arrows indicate days where a learner submitted a problem, if a learner completed the MOOC submitted a problem on these days, then their total number of days is simply the count of these unique days. In other words, for this example, it would be 5. So how many unique days did they submit problems? So again, here's data. This is a box plot now depicting the total number of days for all learners who completed the MOOC on the y-axis, and again, the runs on the x-axis, and you're looking at the quantitative biology MOOC. And interestingly, we found, it was unexpected, was that running a MOOC in self-paced did not result in learners who completed the MOOC submitting problems in a greater total number of days. Instead, what we saw was slightly fewer, if we look at the median here, total number of days in the self-paced runs compared to the instructor-paced runs for the quantitative biology course, or a similar total number of days for the computational programming MOOC with the self-paced run compared to all of its instructor-paced iterations. And in all these cases, the median total number of days for either MOOC was roughly 20 days. So synthesizing all of this together for you, basically what we found was despite being active over a greater range of days, most learners who complete the MOOC do so in either similar or fewer total number of days in self-paced mode compared to instructor-paced mode. And so what this suggested to us was that the majority of learners were not taking advantage of the flexibility of self-paced mode to be active more days uniquely, but instead we're taking the same number of days that completers in an instructor-paced MOOC take, and we're just spreading it out across the days available. So in sum, just summarizing our results again, we found that running a MOOC in self-paced versus instructor-paced did not increase engagement metrics for all learners, whether they were general or far more specific, and that running a MOOC in self-paced versus instructor-paced mode did not increase the activity of learners who completed the MOOC, and specifically, I just showed you that completers submitted problems in a greater range of days, but in less or similar total number of days. And while I didn't have time to show you the data, we also found that they attempted fewer problems per day. So what's our takeaway here? So what we have found for ourselves in our courses that we analyzed is that in looking at the multiple runs of these two different MOOCs that used both modes of course delivery, that despite having longer, more flexible schedule in self-paced mode, that instructor-paced mode was more preferable for our teams in promoting the learner engagement that we care about. And what I'd like you to walk away from this talk thinking is that we don't want to issue any blanket statements about one mode being far superior over another. Instead, what we'd like to really end this talk on is to stress that MOOC designers and facilitators should really consider the goals of the learning experience of the learners in order to choose between these modes. And depending on what is most important to you and what's the experience you most want to uphold for your learners should define which of these modes you choose to offer your MOOCs in. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you all for your attention. I'd be happy to take any quick, incisive questions. And thank you to DLL, thank you to this group. This was very exciting, and feel free to email us if this is exciting to you and you want to learn more.
Thank you, Moni. First of all, question from me. Am I recalling correctly that you also have presented this, or some of you have presented this at a conference?
Yes, I was at the same conference as Jessica Seiland. We presented this work at Learning with MOOCs.
Great, thank you. So there was a question from Caio Gragnani, which has already been answered in the chat, but I'll just draw it to people's attention. Caio asked, did the students in the two modes have the same TA, same discussion forum? And the answer was yes. Ava, you had a question. Do you want to ask your question? Unmute and ask your question, Ava? Or else I can read it.
Sure. No, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Monica, for the presentation. Very interesting. My question is regarding the assessment part. I know you mentioned about graded assignments that I believe you are releasing at the beginning of the course. My question is, were you able to schedule a final exam at the end of the course?
Interesting. So I think I'm speaking for both MOOCs, but Anna should jump in if I get it wrong for computational programming. There is no final assessment in these MOOCs. The assessments are paced according to topic and are completed. And so there is no, I guess we didn't have any trouble scheduling a final at the very end because that wasn't part of our course structure.
I'll agree with that. There was nothing at the end of the course. It's just when students felt like they were ready to take what we call the final exam, they would just start that and they would take the allotted 8 hours whenever they were ready within like the whole year that the course is opened.
Yeah,
So,
but this means that you need to release the assessment at the very beginning of the course with the rest of the material, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly how we run self-paced. You enter a self-paced course and everything you possibly want is already there for you. And your only constraint is that you finish it by the deadline.
right, and so the advantage or disadvantage, one of the advantages is that different people can start at different times. If in an instructor-paced course, if you're 2 weeks late, you come in, it feels like you're 2 weeks late and you have to catch up. Whereas with self-paced, you can start at any time. I mean, that's not pertinent to the research question you asked, but it's an advantage. What would you point to as sort of, even at the, not directly related to the research questions in your study, but to other advantages or disadvantages of either mode that you might point to?
Yeah, I didn't highlight this in the interest of time, but in self-paced mode, we definitely observed learners who completed the course in a matter of days.
Right.
And so what's nice is if you really want to binge a MOOC, I mean, self-paced is definitely the way to go. And you know, the alternative to the point I made about learners who completing the MOOC, taking the same number of days but spreading it out over a longer period of time, it's possible there are learners who could only complete a MOOC by spreading out that time, and there's an advantage to that strategy. And so those are some, I want to speak a little highly of self-paced, at least. I feel like I've beaten on it a little bit, but there are some advantages to being able to do that and having access to everything at once so you can hop in and out. I personally use self-paced mode to look at things.
So there are two more questions in the chat. I'd like to defer a lengthy response, but I believe Sonia's question is a quick answer one. For edX learners, are the actually Mary Ellen just answered it in the chat.
Great.
So Amelia, let me ask you to ask your question at the end after the next presentation, just because I'd like to move to the next presentation. So let's thank Moni again. And Anna, you should please share your screen.
Christine will actually present for our group. So
Okay,
Christine
so-
was my
so the-
MN student.
Good. So our next presentation is from Christine Vonderhaar and Annabelle. Annabelle is one of the pillars of our digital learning lab in computer science. And she leads the course that in fact was part of the study that was just reported on. She leads it both on campus and the MOOC. Christine was her MN student, is now a proud alumna of MIT. And Anna just said Christine will be presenting. So Christine, please take it away.
Great. Hoping everyone can see my screen. Let me know if that isn't the case. Cool. So yeah, as Christian said, I'm a former MIT, both undergrad and grad alum. I worked with Anna both as a TA for her 600 class and as an MN student working with this research. It was about almost a year ago around this time that I was frantically working on this thesis. So had to dust off a few cobwebs for this presentation, but I'm really excited to get back into it. It's really fun stuff. So yep, this talk is about analyzing repeat learners in the computer science MOOC that Anna leads. Yep, so just some background to begin. Computational MOOCs are super popular, as we've seen. They still suffer from high dropout rates and also high rates of people registering and not even viewing the course, but we do have a lot of great data for it. So I analyzed two computational courses that we offer, 6.00.1x and 6.00.2x. From now on, I'll be referring to these as 1x and 2x for shorthand. Each of these courses has been offered on edX 10 or more times with thousands and thousands of learners per run. So there's just so much data with so many learners who are taking these courses. So it's a great data set that we were working with. And we analyzed performance of learners who took the same course multiple times. So that's what a repeat learner is. And I'll get more into that later. So just some research questions that we kind of outlined at the beginning and I'll hopefully answer during this presentation. The first is, what are some typical subgroups of repeat learners? How can we kind of group these people into different characteristics or different performances? How do repeat learners interact with the course differently than their single run counterparts? So do we see any difference in performance or activity? Is there a difference in performance between the different subgroups of repeat learners? So within repeat learners themselves, can we kind of distinguish different areas that they're performing differently? And then finally, how does the introductory course 1X differ from the advanced course 2X in repeat learner engagement? So we have two kind of types of courses that we were able to look at. So the first thing we did before anything else was data cleaning. Because we had so much data, it was important to kind of only get the very best data that we had. So the first thing we did was removed all learners who registered but never reviewed the course. And this was around 45% of learners. So a lot of people were just registering and then never came back to the course at all. And that's not super helpful for us in terms of actually rich data that we can glean anything from. We really only wanted to focus on what we considered active learners. So again, that was about half of the people who initially registered for the course. We also removed a category that we defined as repeat cross-referencers, and we'll get more into that later. We removed them from the overall group, but we also analyzed them separately. So there is some interesting data on that as well. And then finally, we removed learners who only completed the graded problems of the MOOC. So these are people that didn't post anything on the forum, didn't watch any videos or anything besides the graded problems. We speculated that there were some learners who already knew how to code and were perhaps just going through this MOOC as a certification. It ended up being a very small number of learners, so it really didn't make too much of a difference one way or another, but we figured, again, the better, the cleaner, the richer the data, the better. Our final data set did include 857,000 learners from 1X and 122,000 learners from 2X. So even after all that data cleaning, still great data, amount of data samples we had there. Yeah, so moving on to the first research question, which is defining repeat learner subgroups. So as you may guess, a repeat learner is a learner in a MOOC that took the same course 2 or more times. So this actually ended up being around 20% of learners in a course run. So in any given course run, 1 in 5 learners took that same exact course in a previous run. Sometimes these learners didn't do much in their first few runs of the course. It's not like we had people completing the course and then doing it all again, but it was interesting to know that that percentage was that high. A 2-time repeat learner is basically a repeat learner who took the course exactly 2 times. So we did have a few people who literally registered and viewed every single run of the 1X course. So they were technically a 15-time repeat learner, but that was about like 2 people. So the vast majority, 75% of repeat learners are 2-time repeat learners, and we'll look at them specifically later as well. A repeat cross-referencer is a repeat learner who actually looked at previous runs of the course while taking a current run. And what that means is we don't really know what they were looking at or how often they looked at a previous run. All we knew with the data was the date that they accessed a previous run. And if that date was in the date of a current run, we just decided to throw those people out because we had no way to know exactly what they were looking at or exactly how often they were looking at it. And so we just thought it was best to remove them. And then we also analyzed them in a separate kind of analysis. And again, it also ended up being a very small portion of people. So 2,400 in 1X and 175 learners in 2X. So very small portion, but they did get their own category. And then finally, a dual course learner is a learner who took at least one of each course, both 1X and 2X. And so it probably is no surprise that 62% of learners in 2X took 1X at some point. So it really just reinforces that funnel of learners taking 1X first and then 2X. So we'll look at the analysis of all 4 of these groups now. So first is just general repeat learners with any number of semesters. So the graphs show the percent of learners who engage in a course in any semester based on the number of semesters they took total. So we have 3 measures of engagement. Viewed is a learner who at least logs on once. Explored is a learner who visits at least half the chapters. And completed is a learner who earns at a passing grade of at least 55% or more. So as we can see on the graphs, the top one is 1X and the bottom one is 2X. And then the x-axis is the total number of semesters they registered for. The y-axis is basically just the percent of learners who viewed, explored, and completed a course. And as we can see, as the number of total semesters increases, the overall engagement across the board, both in viewed, explored, and completing, the course increases as well. It is important to note, as I mentioned earlier, not a lot of people are registering for this course 15 times. So take all of the data kind of at that 10 plus range with a grain of salt, because it's probably, you know, a sample size of 5 or whatever. But even from 0 to 6, we see a clear increase in engagement and a clear increase in completing the course as well. We do see this phenomenon affects 1X more than 2X. We thought this made sense because for a lot of people, 1X may be their first MOOC ever out of the gate. So maybe they don't know what to expect. They don't know how much commitment there is. They don't really understand what they're getting themselves into. But as they take the course again, they have a better idea of expectations and what's expected. Whereas in 2X, obviously a lot of people took 1X first. And so they know, you know, what they're getting into more or less. So the next group is 2-time repeat learners, which is people who took the course exactly 2 times. The first thing we looked at was just the sheer number, the number of semesters that occurred between a 2-time repeat learners run. So basically, are people taking the course again right after their first course, or are they waiting years and years and runs in between? And again, not super surprising, but a lot of people are taking the course one right after another, and then again it just drops off the later and later you get, which makes sense because, you know, everyone's already kind of in the mindset of MOOCs, and if they didn't do as well as they wanted to in their current run, then it's very logical that they just sign up for the subsequent run. And then the bottom graph is the completion rate of these 2-time repeat learners in their second run based on when they took the course. So basically we wanted to know, you know, if a learner takes it right after, are they more likely to do well than if they waited maybe a few runs in between? And that's basically what these graphs are showing. And we do see a bit of an uptick if a learner takes the course right after another. It wasn't quite as clear as the previous graphs with the engagement. There are, for 0 semesters between runs, the completion rate is higher. And again, with that 10 plus number of semesters between runs, the sample size is smaller. So take that with a grain of salt. One thing we kind of conjectured maybe the reason that a learner would do well, you know, if they had like 6 or more runs in between, is that they kind of, you know, it's very absent-minded to just register for the subsequent run of a course. But if they kind of took some time, you know, reevaluate things and came back to it after a little time off, maybe they had a more, you know, a more purpose with the course and wanted to really kind of do well that time. So the third group, repeat cross-referencers. These are the people who are looking at previous runs of the course in the current run. We did find that these repeat cross-referencers eventually complete the course at suspiciously high rates. So when I say eventually complete, I mean that they pass the course in one run that they took, one of the X number of runs that they took. And so we found that in 1X, repeat cross-referencers eventually completed at a rate of 33%, and I'm getting cut off here, and 32% in 2X. Whereas the average repeat learner eventually completed at a rate of about 10% in 1X and 11% in 2X. And so we coined the term repeat cross-referencers because we don't really have the definitive proof that these people may be cheating or anything like that. But we did see this kind of increase in eventual completion rate, which may suggest that there was some outside help or help that was not their own. Another thing we found was that these repeat cross-referencers are often flagged in the run that they complete. So basically that means, you know, if we're looking at the dates and everything, these repeat cross-referencers are, you know, referencing old courses in the run that they actually pass. So they're not being flagged in runs that they aren't passing. So just an interesting thing with this subgroup. And then finally, dual course learners, which are those learners that took both 1X and 2X on edX. And we're comparing these to learners who only took one or the other. So there are, of course, there are learners who only took 1X, but there are also learners who only took 2X, and I guess just skipped 1X in general. Maybe if they had previous coding experience, this would have been possible. So this table shows the mean completion rate, which is just the average completion rate per run of the course. The ever completion rate, which is basically that eventual completion rate of, for repeat learners, do they ever complete the course if they took the course more than once? Mean active days, which is just another metric that we use to kind of determine how, active and engaged users are, such as how many days they log on to the course, and then mean grade, which is self-explanatory. And we do see that dual course learners have higher completion rates than their single course counterparts, which makes a lot of sense for going from 1x to 2x, because we would hope that everyone who takes 2x completed 1x if they took it. It's not quite the case, but it is a high percentage. And these dual course learners are also more active in general in terms of active days. And at least in 1x, their grades were higher. So in general, we can also recommend, taking both of these courses. So that's pretty much all I have. I'll just go over some conclusions very quickly. We saw that repeat learners engage with and complete a course more than their single run counterparts. And this could be a great way to kind of encourage edX students to take the course again if they aren't happy with their performance. We do have the data showing that it is more likely that you'll pass if you take it again. Two-time repeat learners are more likely to complete the course if they take their second run soon after the first. So again, if we can encourage our edX learners to register quickly after their first one for the highest chance of success. Repeat cross-referencers complete the course at suspiciously high rates, indicating possible cheating behavior, though we weren't able to definitively prove that, but we just removed them from our analysis. And again, dual course learners are doing well, doing better than their single course counterparts. There are tons of opportunities for future research. I mean, this data set has just so many possibilities with it. In particular, the effects of time and feature gating on edX courses. I know that was a thing introduced in 2019, I believe. So that's just one possible area for research, but yeah, that's all I have. But if anyone has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Christine. There were in the chat, well, first of all, Ashe had an interesting observation, which is that in some cases, some of the repeat learners may be multiple people in the same family, which is an interesting possibility. I'm just sharing that. Amelia asked, was this SP or IP? And that was answered also. What are time and feature gating? So feature gating means that now, since was it 2019? I don't remember whether it was 2019 or 2018, but now in many edX courses, there are some features like, for example, a final exam, which are only available to those learners who verify their identity and are intending to get a certificate and pay the fee for their certificate. That's feature gating. And time gating is that, oh, thank you for unsharing, Christine. Time gating is also a new aspect of well, not that new anymore, aspect of the edX platform, which is that for auditors, they only have a time-limited access to the course. If you want to have forever access to the course, you need to verify and sign up for a certificate. Christine, that was great. Are there other, oh, Molly just said, interesting questions from George Stevens. Go ahead, George. Or Molly.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, George.
Okay. I put mine in. Looking at the active rate and completion rates as a function of how many times you took it, they seem to go up sort of in step somewhat. I was curious whether active students actually completed the course at a higher rate if you just include the active ones. So the ones who really tried hard, did they actually do better as they took it more and more times?
So do you mean active student as in a student who actually views the course, or an active student as one that actually, has 20 active days or something like that?
I guess the ones who did most of the assignments.
Yeah. I think it would be very interesting to see. We didn't get into how much of the course they completed during their runs. We basically just looked at if they viewed it at all, and if they and whether or not they completed in that run. it would be very interesting to see kind of break it down more like, oh, you got through 30% your first run and then you got through 70%. Or maybe people who are more likely to complete got through 80% their first time and then got through all of it their next time. So we didn't look at that, but that's a fine-grained analysis that would be super interesting to see for sure.
So thank you very much, Christine. And as you said, there are many future research opportunities. I hope we can keep you engaged in asking and answering interesting questions like this as you go forth as an alum of MIT. Thank you to all the speakers. Let's do a round of applause and then we'll do the broader discussion. So at this point, you don't have to type your questions in the chat if you don't wish to. We can switch to using yellow hands. For those of you not used to the newly upgraded platform from Zoom, your hand raising feature is at the bottom of the screen under reactions. So if you'd like to ask a question of any of the presenters, or if one presenter wants to ask a question of another presenter, please raise your yellow hand. And I'm going to call on Amelia Crespo first because she had a question for Moni, which I cut off previously. So Amelia, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, thanks. Yes, so I was just trying to kind of dig into that takeaway from the second presentation. So what I understood was that to determine if an IP or an SP, so an instructor-paced or self-paced mode was best for your course, you should look at what your goals are for the learning experiences of the course, or what your learning goals are for the course. So I was just wondering if there was any more information that the presenter could share about like which learning goals are best suited for which modes, if there was any kind of takeaways in that sense.
Yeah, I may have to answer. I think Moni had to go to another meeting, and Anna, you can feel free to jump in after my words. But I think, we don't know exactly, we didn't do a research study where we said this aligns with this sort of mode or the other, but some perspective from just running our courses. If you're a staff trying to run the course, if you're not going to, in our study, we did find that discussion forum percentage of people who participate, especially those who complete, it's lower in the self-paced mode. So if me as an instructor, if I care more that people are participating and discussing the content on the forum, then I would prefer to do instructor-paced. And there's reasons for that, because you are talking about the same content week to week versus when you have it open self-paced, anyone could ask about any area of the course at any point in any assignment. And so it gets a little bit more confusing, and then it ends up being a lot of one-off and nobody replying comments, unless it's like staff goes in there and replies to something, because people are working at things at all different times. When it's instructor-paced, people are working at all the same assignments at the same time. So that's one example of something you may consider.
Thanks, Mary Ellen, and thank you for jumping in for Moni. Anyone else from that team want to add anything, or I'm looking for yellow hands or questions in the chat. So anyone, please do jump in. I see a yellow hand from Nina, but anything to add to Mary Ellen said? Okay, Nina.
My question is for the Mary Ellen team. I'm wondering if there's interest in doing some learner outcomes comparisons. So I know that the research found that like grades were not that different between instructor-paced and self-paced, having read your full paper. But are some of the other learning outcomes perhaps of interest to compare? So if you discuss more, do you have a higher performance, and that would suggest that we need to encourage discussion, which self-paced obviously makes challenging. Or if a shorter time to learn, is there longer term memory or shorter term memory of what is learned? So I'm just curious if there's interest in going beyond what you measured here and thinking about other kinds of learning outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. It's something of interest. I think, obviously the long-term retention is very difficult to measure, especially in MOOCs where we don't even know where these learners go, and it's different in MIT students. But I think there is, people who post to the forums do complete more. So I don't know if it's correlation or causation. And so that's the thing that maybe we could tease out in future research or try to figure out. But I think there is definitely a pattern of people who post the forums more, complete more.
Thank you. So I have Mingyu and then Ava after Mingyu. So Mingyu, go ahead.
Cool, thank you. I have a question for Jessica about the electronic properties course. So as a material science student myself and having had to go through a similar course, many times before, I know from first experience that that particular course is like a super stressful, anxiety-inducing experience in a way that I can imagine comics can relieve that emotional burden for on-campus students more so than perhaps a more relaxed MOOC learner. Yes. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts or data on the stress relieving or the affective state or motivation of online versus in-person learners and what comics might contribute to that.
I have no data, and I think I would like to actually collect more data, because I think you bring up, sort of a good point. We're kind of looking at performance. We're kind of looking at, do they like it? Do they think this is, but I think that very real question of does it help relieve their stress? Does it make it more approachable? One of the things that I think about too, as far as the students' reaction to the comics, is that a MOOC learner has a very different relationship with Professor Anikieva than an MIT student has with Professor Anikieva. And I wonder how that influences their reactions to the comics. But I think you bring up a really, really important point, that there is also this question of sort of relieving students' anxiety, making a course, making the material or making the course team seem more approachable, things like that might be, I think it's a lot easier to be intimidated, in person in some ways than it is with, sort of a disembodied, computer screen. And so it may be that those things are just a lot more important to our MIT students. But yeah, I think that's an excellent question.
So let me add, it's really not done to do A/B tests with MIT students in the classroom. That's sort of not a cool thing to do. So I don't think we can get data in the way that Jessica was able to do with edX learners, where A/B testing is built into the platform. But anecdotally, I think you're right for the MIT students. That course is one that should induce stress, given its content and its level and its difficulty and its role in the material science curriculum. And usually when students feel stressed by their course and their content, they don't give it 6.9s. So something that Professor Anikieva is doing is relieving that stress. Whether it's the comics is one can discuss, but it sure seems like that must be part of it. The other thing I'll say, which really comes out of the research study, Jessica, is a sense that humor is culturally constructed. A joke that really relieves the stress for me as a person in the same cultural context as Professor Anikieva might, for some MOOC learner who's in a different cultural context, might be a stress inducer because they don't get it. Yeah. And so the challenge of deploying humor in a MOOC context, it seems to me to be an interesting challenge. I'm curious if you want to comment.
I would agree on all these points. I think, I agree. We can't A/B test our MIT students. I do think it might be interesting to send out, some surveys on this, to just kind of get student impressions and how they at least sort of perceive this as far as their stress levels and things like that. But to your other question, Krishna, yes, I think, I think that the cultural issue is potentially a big one. I think, I think there are generally issues of cognitive load here for our students. We are asking them to do something that is inherently hard. And for an MIT student, these comics are very accessible. They understand the context, they understand the language. There is nothing that is going to confuse them about Pharaoh and his, electromagnetic adventures. That's very clear. I don't think we can generalize that to our MOOC population. I think that there are students for whom getting through that context, it does increase the cognitive load, increases the challenge, and therefore maybe, less appealing. I noticed that a majority of students said they liked the comics, but a large majority of the students said they didn't particularly necessarily want them there either. And I think those are sort of two different questions, like, are these enjoyable, but also how do they influence your problem set experience? And so, yeah, I think that there are sort of many, many important.
Very interesting.
Krishna, we're just about at time, but I'm
Well,
wondering if maybe
we have one more question,
Yes,
which I'm going to take. But Ava, this will probably, to everyone else, will probably be the last question. So please be insistent if you want to ask a question after Ava. But Ava, you're next.
Thank you, Krishna. So my question is related to the self-paced courses for Mary Ellen, and maybe Nina can also jump in, because one of my main concerns with the self-paced courses is to ensure academic integrity. And it's because the reason that you need to release all of the graded assignment and the final exam at the very beginning. So my question is related, do you have any, or is there any research that support that in self-paced courses is more difficult to ensure this academic integrity because we are releasing the final exams or any assessment at the very beginning, so the student has more opportunities to share those exam questions? Is there any research related to that, or have you investigated that? Because from my experience, this is my main concern with the self-paced courses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you know, another course that we run is Introduction to Biology course. And we basically have adopted a hybrid mode for that course of self-paced and instructor-paced. So we have materials for learning as self-paced, and we have peer materials like the competency exam that is a comprehensive final exam as a separate thing that runs instructor-paced a specific week because of this issue. So I think in that work, we have shown, even not in self-paced, but instructor-paced compared to hybrid mode, where we have the assessment just in 1 week and have a different type of more thorough assessment with randomization and other techniques not to show correctness, then we do show the cheating decreases. So I think with now with edX, you know, the assessments don't have to be as visible as they were before, because people who verify are the ones who get access to the assessment. And that used to be only in our course with the comprehensive exam before this competency exam. So I think, you know, it probably, if someone did a study today, you'd have to do it with whatever model the course is currently running. But there is evidence, right? If you restrict the time, that it does prevent some of this cheating as well. I think Nina put something in the chat too.
Yeah, so Nina added something in the chat. I'm going to add something in a different direction, Ava, which is that not with a MicroMasters in mind for everyone else. Ava is the lead for one of our most impressive MicroMasters, the MicroMasters in Supply Chain Management. So I'm not speaking here with a MicroMasters in mind, but various of us are thinking through, and maybe haven't quite hit the nail on the head yet, a model where you offer a course self-paced for the benefit of students who want to start and end at any time. But then you have within that self-paced 360 days, you have a 60-day period where you offer, you know, an instructor-paced cohort. So for those students who are interested in starting in the week that you define, they will have the benefit of a cohort experience with the discussion forum advantages that were described earlier. So that in particular, as edX introduces online campus, which is an effort to increase the uptake of edX courses by students at universities. If you have students at a university, they may want to start at the beginning of their semester, which who knows when that could be. It could be any, from our point of view, any random time. But they also may have the opportunity to form a cohort of their own in their university and ask questions, not in the edX forum, but in their university. So I think there's a need for a hybrid model like that. I'm not sure we have it nailed yet. This is a conversation that Nina has been a part of. I don't know if she wants to add anything, but I also don't want to put her on the spot.
Oh no, I never mind being put on the spot, Krishna. But I think that you summed it up pretty well. I mean, we know both from the work that you all are doing and this research that there are benefits to cohorted learning that we want to try and support, while also trying to attend to those learners who are balancing all the rest of life and only have a weekend to binge that course and get it done. And then of course, all of that with academic integrity being really critical. So hard challenge, but this group in particular, MIT, is never shied from hard challenges. So I look forward to continuing that conversation to figure that out.
Thank you, Nina, and thank you for joining us today. Molly, should I wrap this? I don't see other yellow hands.
I see no yellow hands. We can wrap it up.
So thank you, first of all, to all the presenters for their presentations and for the great work that made these presentations possible. Congratulations to all of you for your presentations at the Learning with MOOCs conference. I forgot to say it, but Anna and Christine's paper was presented there also. So thank you to all and congratulations to all. I'll do a little. And thank you to everyone else for attending, and all best wishes that 2021 starts to, we're all looking forward to a better 2021, and I hope it starts soon.